Ben lived in a typical American suburb, on a street lined with houses that were much like his. He lived with his parents and older sister. By all standards, it was a pleasant and pretty conventional existence for any kid around there. Summer break had just begun, and Ben was making the best of it. Warm, sunny days enjoyed at the pool, and spending time with friends in the evening. And he always found time to squeeze in some video games before bed, since he could stay up much later now that school was out. Most nights his parents ran the air conditioning, but on really pleasant nights they would keep the windows open and enjoy the fresh air. Those were Ben's favorite nights, and tonight was one of those. But this night would be different. It was well after midnight, and Ben's eyes cracked open from a deep sleep. It was very quiet except for the crickets chirping outside his open window. The only light came from a small night light on the other side of the room. Ben shifted in bed, making himself more comfortable, and closed his eyes. That's when he noticed it. It actually took him a moment to figure out what it was. Summer nights were not quiet. The sounds of crickets and frogs were as familiar as the sun setting. But right now, everything was quiet. Totally quiet. His eyes opened once more and he propped himself up on one elbow, listening. Nothing. How weird. He furrowed his eyebrows and listened some more. Still silence. Ben slid his feet out from under the covers, dropping them on the floor. He stood and moved to his open window, scanning the backyard. In the hazy darkness, he could see his mom's garden, the porch with the grill and patio furniture. Then he saw, in the middle of the yard, just standing there, a man. Fear swept over him, and he moved beside the window, hoping not to be seen. Slowly, he summoned his courage and peeked outside once more. The man was still there, just standing in the middle of the lawn. It was hard to make out any details in the dark, but the man looked tall and somewhat slim. Ben strained to get a better look, and the man looked at him, right at him. Again he jerked away from the window, his heart pounding in his chest. The man saw him. He stood fixed for what seemed to be an eternity. He glanced at his clock. It was 1:14 a.m. What is that man doing out in our yard in the middle of the night? He needed to look again, but he was afraid. Finally, he took a deep breath and looked out the window into the yard. No one was there. He looked and looked to be sure. The yard was empty. He exhaled a large sigh of relief and then realized, as his fear subsided, the delicate sounds of evening had resumed. Ben ran down the hall and into his parents' bedroom. He woke them and did his best to explain what he saw. His dad ran downstairs, turning on the outside lights. There was no one in the yard. Ben was relieved. His dad told him he probably saw an animal and that the darkness had played tricks on his eyes. Ben listened agreeably, but in reality, he knew what he saw. The next day was rather uneventful. Ben mowed the lawn and hung out with friends. Then he spent the evening being lazy and staying up late, two of his favorite things. He'd all but forgotten about the previous evening's events. But as he lay down in bed, the image of the shadowy figure standing in his yard ran a chill down his spine. He decided watching some funny videos would be a good distraction and help him fall asleep. And sure enough, he was out like a light. It was still dark when he opened his eyes again. His tablet was lying flat on the bed, so he moved it onto his nightstand and glanced at his clock. It was just after 2 a.m. He settled back under the covers when the thought occurred to him, what if he's out there again? He shook his head, trying to shoo the thought away, but a cold fear washed over him. What if the man was out there? Whatever sleepiness he woke with was stolen from him. He's waiting for me to look out the window. Ben laid there, his heart thumping. He turned toward his tablet and tapped the screen, which immediately lit up. Ben sat up in bed, scrolling through videos. This is so stupid. Gradually, his attention shifted and his eyes searched his thoughts. He gently set his tablet down and exhaled. Very quietly, he stood up and crept over to the window. It was closed tonight, and the AC was on since it was so warm. He inched his face around the window frame to peek outside. His eyes searched the shadowy gloom. Oh God. He immediately pulled his head back. The man was there again, standing in the middle of the lawn, looking right at him. His terror was palpable as his heart hammered inside his chest. He saw me. He didn't want to look again, but he did anyway. Just like the night before, right in the center of the lawn, a man stood there, looking up at Ben. But this time, there was something next to him. The man gestured to it and then looked back at Ben. What is that? Ben strained to try and see what the man was showing him. It was like a big long box. No, it was a coffin. Not an old-fashioned wooden coffin, but a modern metal casket like you'd see in a funeral home. Ben gasped as his mouth hung open, his eyes wide. The man knelt down next to it and looked up again. The man was scared. No, he was pretending to be scared. He was teasing Ben. He reached over and started to open the casket, then stopped and looked up at Ben. With the window closed, there was no sound. Ben was frozen with fright. The man started to lift the lid of the coffin just a little and hastily closed it again. He looked up at Ben. What's inside the coffin? Ben wondered in horror. Don't open it, he whispered to himself. He knew that whatever was inside that coffin, he didn't want to know. The man seemed to understand this and began opening the lid again. But after lifting it open only a few inches, he paused. The man peeked inside the casket, then looked up at Ben. Ben shook his head no. The man opened the lid slightly more, but not enough to show what was inside. Ben pulled his head back from the window, hiding against the wall beside it. His heart was racing. He could feel sweat forming on his forehead. He would not look outside again. Instead, he ran to his parents' bedroom. He burst inside, startling his mom and dad awake. As they calmed his nerves, he tried to explain what he saw. His dad immediately ran downstairs as his mother comforted him. Shortly after, his father returned and assured him there was no one in the yard. They were both convinced he'd had a nightmare, a very realistic one, but it was only a nightmare. After all, his dad told him, caskets are really heavy, and there's no way some guy could get it out of the yard before he was able to get downstairs. More importantly, there was no sign that anyone or anything had been in the yard or on the grass. They told him again and again, it had to be a bad dream. Ben wanted to believe them, he truly did, but he knew he was awake, and he knew what he saw. Worse yet, he knew the man knew he saw him. It's what the man wanted. For the next several nights, Ben slept on the floor of his parents' bedroom. He stayed up late, treating it like indoor camping, but with an iPad. It was just what he needed. His sister did make fun of him for being such a baby, but he didn't care. It was a heck of a lot better than, well, the alternative. Plus, his dad even got up in the middle of the night a couple times to check the yard. It was all clear and wonderfully uneventful. The next night was Ben's agreed-upon return to a normal sleeping arrangement. As long as normal was part of the equation, he was fine with it. But he'd also be lying if he said he wasn't a little worried. The good news is that his dad was going to leave the lights on in the backyard, and Ben could fall asleep with a TV, iPad, or whatever he needed to help him feel more comfortable. That was nice, and he was going to take advantage of it. Lying in his own bed that night was unnerving. Fear crept into his mind over and over. He wanted to look out his window, but decided against it. At some point, he did fall asleep. He knew because when his eyes opened next, it was light out. He immediately went to the window to find the sun shining and the backyard green and every bit as ordinary as he wanted it to be. Night after night, he nervously went to bed and kept himself distracted with YouTube or TV or both. Thankfully, each night ended the same way, with him sleeping fitfully and waking to a standard summer morning. He was happy to have things back to normal, and his sister had finally stopped making fun of him. It was the fifth night back in his own room. He'd mostly forgotten about the scary man in the yard, or so he'd thought. It was quite late. His clock read 1:36 a.m. His eyes became heavy, and as he watched another video, he'd begun to drift off to sleep. Then, a chill ran up his spine, and his eyes flung open. Oh no, Ben thought to himself. He sat up in bed and tried his best to gather his wits. There's nobody out there, he told himself. But the feeling he had, it was the same as those other nights. A horrible pit in his stomach, and he could literally feel the hair standing up on the back of his neck. He clicked his tablet off to make the room darker. His dad was still leaving the light on in the backyard. That was good. He simply sat on the edge of his bed and waited for several minutes. Suddenly, the awful feeling passed. Everything felt normal. Ben waited several more minutes. All was quiet. However, he remembered that the window was closed since the AC was on. Thank God for that. And everything still felt okay. He decided he needed to look out the window just to be sure. He was afraid to do it, but it needed to be done. He had to be sure. Sure the man wasn't there. He rose quietly and tiptoed over to the window in the darkness. He took several deep breaths, holding the last, and looked outside. The light was on, illuminating most of the backyard. He quickly scanned everything, especially the middle of the lawn. There was nothing there. Ben exhaled with relief and moved away from the window. It was a great feeling. He sat back down on his bed and started a new video, then slid under the covers. It was a YouTuber he liked. This dude was pretty funny. Ben, a voice whispered, causing goosebumps to rise all over his body. Ben. It sounded like it was coming from outside. He lay in bed, frozen. Come to the window, the whispered voice implored, but Ben didn't move as terror held him in place. It's me, come to the window. The voice, it's his sister. He jumped out of bed and ran to the window. He looked outside and could see her waiting below. What are you doing? She looked up at him and laughed. Ha, I scared you, idiot. Ben was both embarrassed and annoyed. I'm telling Mom and Dad, he said angrily. Go ahead, she laughed. Ben stood up and stomped out of his room. He flipped on the hallway lights and headed straight to his parents' bedroom, opening the door without a knock. Ben gasped. The room was empty, except for 3 caskets sitting on the carpeted floor. Each was copper in color and closed. Horror consumed Ben as his eyes filled with tears. Mom? Dad? He didn't know what to do as he stared at the coffins. Suddenly, something grabbed his arm. Ben turned to see the man from his backyard. He was very tall and wearing a dark suit. He wasn't very old, maybe about the same age as Ben's dad. He had dark, neatly combed hair and a mustache. Your sister let me in. You wouldn't have let me in, would you? He glared at Ben as he held his arm so tight that it hurt. For a moment, the man's face softened. Do you know who I am? I've never told anyone my name. He smiled. There are stories about me, but none know me. His lips spread wider, too wide, the corners of his mouth nearly touching his ears. He had so many teeth. His eyes changed too. The whites of his eyes became black and his irises became white. The man looked from Ben to the caskets. Never let a stranger inside your home, Ben. Never. He began dragging the boy toward them, because bad things can happen. He pushed Ben down in front of the casket furthest to the left. Terrible things can happen. Ben began to cry, his body trembling with fear. No. The man's eyes grew larger. He reached down, grabbing Ben by the back of the neck with one hand and the lid of the first coffin with the other. We will open it. It's my favorite part. The lights in the room flickered briefly, and the man opened the casket. Inside lay his mother. She looked as if she were sleeping, her hands crossed over her chest. Ben stared in horror. His mother's eyes slowly opened. They were entirely red, with small black dots in the center. She looked at him. Ben recoiled but couldn't move away as the man held him in place. She sat up slowly in the coffin, her horrible eyes studying her son. He stole our souls, Ben. We serve a dreadful master now. She suddenly grabbed Ben's hand. Her flesh was icy and dry like stone. The dragon cowers on his throne before my master. The man peeled Ben's mom's hand off, and she immediately laid back down. She is too kind, your mum. The man maneuvered the boy back from the caskets, and with a wave of his hand, the other 2 lids opened. Inside the adjacent coffins were Ben's father and sister, and like his mom, they appeared to be sleeping. I was going to take you with us. The man looked down at the boy. Tears streamed down Ben's face to his jaw as his mouth hung agape. The man smiled again as he traced a wet streak down Ben's cheek with his finger. You, boy, will remain. He turned Ben's face to meet his. Malevolence filled the man's pitch-black eyes as his lips curled, revealing dozens of rotten teeth. Know my face. Know my voice. We will meet again. And with a crack of thunder, everything went black. Ben's eyes opened. He was lying in bed in an all too familiar place. Outside his window, the sun was bright, and he could see leafy trees swaying in the wind. As he looked away from the window, he could see into the hospital hallway. A soft electronic bell beeped, and one of the doctors outside his room walked away. The other, Dr. Adams, Ben's doctor, walked in to see him. "How you feeling today, Ben?" the doctor said kindly. Ben didn't respond, instead turning his head toward the window once more. "We are making progress. Dr. Klein sees it too." Ben looked back at Dr. Adams, but said nothing. The doctor pulled a chair next to the bed and sat down. "You know I want nothing more than to help you. Then you could start by believing me." The doctor sighed in response. "Can we talk about you and me sitting down with your family? They miss you terribly and love you," and Ben gritted his teeth in anger. "No, never. For the last time, they are not my family." His doctor nodded calmly. I know. The boy set a cold eye on his doctor, then stopped asking. A sad uncertainty washed over Dr. Adams. "Here's the thing, Ben. After almost a year of treatment, your parents believe you'll do better at home, and they've initiated your release from the hospital." Ben's mouth fell open. "No, they can't do that." The doctor frowned. "They can, Ben. Your parents have full authority." Panic filled the boy's eyes, and Dr. Adams tried to reassure him. "But I'm still going to be working with you. I'll be with you every step of the way. I'll give you my cell, and you can call any time, day or night." Ben slouched, seeming to shrink from the news. The doctor rose and headed out of the room, looking back once to see Ben exactly as he left him, sunken and depressed. He sighed sadly and headed down the hall. The days leading up to Ben leaving the hospital were quiet and uneventful. Ben's parents and sister came and discussed his continued therapy, then took him home. It was a hard day for Ben and Dr. Adams, too. He developed a real bond with the boy and sympathized with him, and it hurt him deeply that he couldn't have done more to help. But something about that day bothered him as well. It was a small moment, really, and quite brief. As the family was leaving, Ben's mom had looked back and smiled at him. But the smile was strange. Not what you'd expect from a mother finally bringing her child home. The smile, it took him time to find the right word. The smile seemed cunning, like she had taken something that didn't belong to her. The next day, Dr. Adams called the family's house to check on Ben. His father said he was doing okay and that he'd actually coaxed a couple words out of him. This helped ease the doctor's concerns a bit and allowed him to sleep more than he had the previous few nights. But it would all come crashing down. On the day of their first family counseling session, Dr. Adams was unusually anxious and unable to eat his lunch, and his fears were confirmed when no one showed up for the appointment. He called their home and both parents' cell phones, but no one answered. So he left the office early and drove to their home for a well-being check. What he found startled him. The grass was severely overgrown, the property unkempt. It had an overall appearance like it had been abandoned for some time. He checked around the house itself, and it was empty, completely empty. As he stood outside, a neighbor approached. The older man was clearly surprised that Dr. Adams would come here looking for them. He said no one had lived there for months. And as for the family, it was like they had simply disappeared after Ben was hospitalized. No one saw a moving truck or anyone in or around the house ever again. Dr. Adams was stunned and mystified. He immediately got law enforcement involved, but they were every bit as baffled as he was. It was like Ben and his family had literally vanished into thin air. The next few days and nights were terrible for the doctor. Tormented by guilt, second-guessing his decisions, and contemplating all the things he should have done differently. Worse were the dreams. He was besieged by a terrible recurring dream. In it, he saw lifeless Ben lying in a casket with his eyes open and staring directly at him. And while the boy's face was frozen in death, he was screaming. But this morning, Dr. Adams found himself in a place of abject terror, and it caused him to do something completely out of character for such a refined psychiatrist. He walked into a church and prayed. Because shortly after he arrived at his office this morning, he was forced to confront the fact that a nightmare had become reality. His reality. You see, after meeting with a few patients, he discovered a voicemail on his cell phone. It was his wife, and her voice was trembling. She said their youngest daughter had just told her she'd been awakened in the middle of the night by a voice calling her name from outside. And when she looked out her window into the darkness below, she saw a man standing in the yard. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this story, and if you like this kind of content, please like, share, and subscribe. It really helps, and I truly appreciate it. Also, you have permission to beat the notifications bell to a bloody pulp. In fact, I encourage it. See you next time.